Oh, it's not in video mode, that's what's going on. It is taking a video, so riddle me that. Anyway, while my computer is updating, which I need to wait for it to do before I can start work, I want to talk a little bit about this book that I just finished reading yesterday. It's called The Cyber Effect. It's by a woman named Mary Aiken, and it's all about the impact of the cyber world on our lives, and that includes obviously like what's on our mobile phones, social networks, online gaming, online shopping, all kind of online communications, as well as things like just the impact of surfing the web on our cognitive function, the impact of technology, iPods, well, not iPods, but like screens on children. Basically everything cyber, which is almost our whole lives now. I do use a $10 bill Canadian. I know to some of you this looks like Monopoly money, but it's kind of cool. It's like indestructible. Use a $10 bill for my bookmark because I am flush with cash. That's not true. The book kind of begins by going through general stuff that relates to everybody. What impact does being in a cyberspace have on our behavior? There's something that she calls the disinhibition effect, that when we're in the cyber world, we exaggerate our behavior. So we're either way more positive or way more negative, and we find ourselves saying or doing things in cyberspace that we would never really do in a face-to-face encounter. And of course, like in extreme cases, this can be like cyberbullying and things like that. So it starts with some general stuff, along with the disinhibition effect. She talks about the normalization of extreme behaviors, that there are some extreme and unhealthy behaviors, but people go into a cyber context and find like-minded people, and it kind of normalizes extreme behaviors or destructive or harmful behaviors. She has this whole part called the normalization of a fetish, which you will spend the rest of the week trying to scrub out of your mind's eye. There's definitely some extreme content in it, but it is, I think it's an important book, both for evaluating the way you yourself or I myself engage technology in the cyber world. There's some irony that I'm making a video about this to put on the cyber world, assuming I get around to it. But then a very interesting part is she goes through, and this is a good chunk of the book, she goes through stages of development. So babies to 2 years old. How is the cyber culture, so to speak, impacting them as they're being given iPads or whatever as low as like 6 months old? How's that impacting basic functions and developments, like the idea of object permanence, or the fact that their parents' use of cyber and technology is keeping their faces away from their children, and how that's inhibiting basic progress in those first 6 months, in that first year, in those first 2 years. So that's kind of a really sobering chunk of the book, is thinking about those childhood stages, and not just how they're using technology if we put it in their hands, but also how a parent or guardian or adult's use of technology impacts those children. And then it goes through the stage of like childhood, so up to like 12 years old, and the things that many children are exposed to during this time, the freedom that a lot of parents or guardians will give children at this time, and some of the dangers, which again are super sobering. And then it goes through the teen years, and all the, kind of exaggerating, no, not exaggerating, but unpacking some of the implications of cyber technology that we're even now seeing in teenagers. And she brings up the question, although it would take longitudinal studies to really observe this, she brings up the point that we don't have time to wait for those longitudinal studies before we think and do something. But she brings up the question of how cyber technology might impact or inhibit the development of a healthy self-concept, working from a psychological background of a self-concept, which she defines, I think it was Carl Rogers, you can correct me, it's in the book, but that a self-concept is your view of yourself, so your self-image, and then the value you place on yourself, your self-esteem, and then what you desire yourself to be, or your picture of your ideal self. So this whole sort of self-concept that we sort of discover and experiment with while we're in our teenage years. Oh my goodness, 31 minutes remaining on my update. I'm just going to keep talking. We develop this self-concept in our teenage years, but technology is removing us from being able to develop that with real people in the real world. The social media that you kind of pour yourself into has the impact of removing you from other people. And she does these studies, or not really studies, but she points out these cases in which young people, instead of wanting to spend more time with people, lose interest in people because they're more and more kind of sucked into this kind of tech mirror of. Anyway, it's, is it sensationalist? Maybe, but are there real dangers, or at least real things that we should think about? Certainly. And then she talks about, in the teenage chapter as well, things having to do with sexual content and dangers there, which are, of course, very significant. And then she gets more into adult life, things like online dating. What else does she talk about with? I mean, there's a whole big chunk about gaming, addiction, online shopping. So there's a lot of topics that she covers. And then the last chapter is seems to me like it's a bit slapped together, but she kind of just expounds on, well, what could we maybe do about it? What should we expect from tech companies that are really, really smart about designing things that are really, really desirable? And they're always talking about, well, this is really user-friendly, this is user-friendly. And she says, well, what if we thought about in terms of, is this human-friendly? Which you kind of see what she's saying there. Like, is this actually good for our humanity, our connection, the human race? So she kind of, the final chapter is a bit like her, her treatise on, or her, what's the word? The word slips me. But anyway, it's a really good book, I think, just for self-assessment. This maybe not, where's my focus here? It's a good book both for the sake of self-assessment and for, especially if you're a caretaker, if you have kids, if you spend time with kids, just to give some thought to the way that technology is entering into their lives and what kind of impacts or fallout that might have. And it doesn't take some kind of extreme stance like we need to just burn our phones or we need to disconnect. I mean, she's realistic about the fact that today, in the world, to be a functioning human, you pretty much are using technology. You're using it for communication, you're using it to pay your bills, you're using it for all these other things. But at the same time, just being human should lead us to stop and think. Are these things helping us be more human, or are these things taking away from our lives? Being a parent of young children, my kids are 3 and 4, it gives me a lot to think about as far as what role technology has in their lives and what relationship we want to allow it to have in the coming years. As there's a lot of kind of formative decisions with pretty serious impacts. And of course, just being reminded of potential dangers, things that a lot of us kind of think maybe are somewhat benign, like online gaming. Of course, we know there's dangers, but just to be, again, alerted of some of those dangers. I mean, if you want to just be reminded of the worst of humanity, I mean, the book brings up the predators, the trolls, the whole reality of the dark web, but just the realities of the potential dangers. Having children in the modern age has certain responsibilities and anxieties that, of course, people are always anxious for their children, but the dangers can just come right into our homes, right into our screens, right into our... So anyway, it's given me a lot to think about. I'm still kind of processing it, but I do recommend this book for just general everybody, but especially for its implications for children, because that's obviously my context. I still have 14 minutes for my computer to update, so what else do you guys want to talk about? So if there are other books that are kind of on similar topics that you know of, I would love to read more about this, so please let me know. There is a place down at the bottom, if you scroll down, where you can put on your phone that you're watching this on, or on your computer, you can put, oh, such and such book by so-and-so. 13 minutes. All right, have a good one.